Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I think it's fair to say Dominic Cummings has become the story overnight. Dominic Cummings is, of course, the unelected bureaucrat who advises Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is, of course, the Prime Minister who unlawfully closed Parliament, and Dominic Cummings is the unelected bureaucrat who was judged to be in contempt of Parliament earlier this year. But obviously delivering Brexit is all about restoring parliamentary power and parliamentary sovereignty. And that, I think, is my explanation of why things are so mad. It is impossible. And you know, I don't think I'm... two things, actually. Let's get them out early. The first reason why I think it's very hard to talk about rapprochement or bridge building is, I'm sorry to say this, because I'm just going to entrench probably the division myself now, but they can't stop lying. If you listen to this programme, even on a cursory basis, you will know, for example, that I have spent 3.5 years furiously opposing the notion that everyone who voted to leave the European Union was stupid or racist or both. I mean, furiously opposing it. I've told you about my cleverest friend, my oldest friend, my daughter's godfather who voted to leave. He is neither stupid nor racist, nor any of the other epithets that are routinely bandied about by the Leave side. This is the weirdest thing. I'm sure there are a couple of Remainers out there who've been rude, but the idea that you can sit here on live national radio and repeatedly say it is disgusting to suggest that every Leave voter is a racist, and then within 3 seconds of saying it, every single day, my inbox fills up, and again, who knows how many of these people or these accounts are human in origin or sincere in intent. It feels like, well, how dare you call us all stupid thick? Obviously, some people who voted Leave are stupid and racist and both. Because they prove it every day by claiming that everybody has been called that. It's quite incredible. So that is one massive obstacle to rebuilding trust in each other. You know, it didn't used to be like this. And the other one, I'm afraid, this is something that you might not like much, but I honestly believe, as a relatively reasonable human being who, despite the fillip that it has given to my profile or career or whatever you want to call it, you know, if David Cameron's book carries on performing at roughly the level it is performing now, I will have the best-selling politics book of 2019. That's just nuts. Absolutely nuts. 5 years ago, we were talking about parking tickets and potholes. Well, we weren't, actually. We were taking the mickey out of people who talk about parking tickets and potholes, but it's two sides of the same coin. So I think I'm quite reasonable. And by now, if you had said to me as a Leaver, don't worry, mate, this, and this, right? Then I would have, I think by now, I'd have wound my neck in. This is an oddly personal perspective, actually. I've tried to work out why I haven't wound my neck in. I have perhaps a more exposed neck than most, and I use those words advisedly given the context of threats and violence and the memories of murders that we've been concerning ourselves with this week. But I honestly think, and I've talked this through with a couple of very qualified colleagues, I honestly think that by now we would all have just gone, all right, let's just crack on then, because X, Y, Z, tangible benefits or mitigation of potential negatives. Here are some positives. Here are some explanations of how we're going to deal with the negatives. I honestly believe that. You can call me a liar, I can live with that, or you can simply not believe me or think that I'm being naive. But I can't quite see how else we could have behaved. You know, if over the course of 3.5 years, when people have rung me in their hundreds to tell me why they voted, to tell me why they voted to leave the European Union, and I have very calmly and politely and affectionately, or of course, if you're down the rabbit hole, condescendingly and sneeringly and dishonestly, but politely, calmly, affectionately, 90% of the time, I've examined the reasons given. I've listened to the why, not the what. What do you want? I want to leave. Fine. Why do you want to leave? And let's be a little bit hyperbolical at this stage, shall we? Let's reach for the stars, as S Club 7 famously advised us to do all those years ago. I don't think we've heard a single substantive answer, as in something that you could measure with a calculator or a ruler. Why do you want to leave? What is it you're going to get? What is it that makes it better? Better, not, oh, it won't be as bad as all that, or hopefully it'll stay the same, but actually better. And I wonder whether now that's the whole plan of Boris Johnson and his buddies. It just don't talk about benefits, Brexit. Don't talk about positive. Do not allow anyone even to ask the question of why on earth are we doing this, in terms of reasons, not in terms of the result in 2016. There's a reason why they keep wanging on about that. And that is really terrifying. And I think, I almost wish now that we could step away from that division. You know, it's actually a little bit terrifying to think that we now have a Prime Minister in place who closed our Parliament unlawfully, who hired an unelected bureaucrat found earlier this year, judged earlier this year, to be in contempt of the Parliament that the Prime Minister subsequently closed unlawfully. It's quite incredible to reflect upon some of the stories surrounding Boris Johnson still bubbling away in a very Trumpian fashion, involving women and pole dancers and public money and all the things that we would once have somewhat smugly concluded just were not the British way. But now such is the depth of division and entrenchment and tribalism, as we have had the privilege, I think, and again I use that word advisedly, the astonishing privilege of people having the confidence and the kindness to ring me and tell me that, yes, James, I will forgive him anything because of Brexit. I will forgive him anything. Impropriety in his personal life. We kind of knew he got a free pass on that. Astonishing to see people who publicly describe themselves as devout Catholics, or at least as Catholics, like Jacob Rees-Mogg or Ian Duncan Smith, I think, or certainly Tony Gallagher, who edits the Sun newspaper. They are all cheerleading for a man whose morals, well, it's probably not fair to Alley Cat to compare his morals to those of Alley Cat. So everything's corrupted, everything's broken on that side of the argument. And that's not a very nice thing to say either, because that entrenches division. But here's the thing, right? There's a gulf between us. There's a Grand Canyon between us. And we want to fill it in. We want to build not just a bridge, but we want to fill in the whole canyon and go back to being a complete country. Why can't we? Well, because this thing that you insist you want to do doesn't make any sense. It did. I can see completely how 3.5 years ago you might have felt very strongly about immigration, for example. But remember that the withdrawal agreement that the ERG scuppered would actually have signalled the abolition of freedom of movement of people. It did what you wanted, potentially. As soon as we solve the problem in Ireland, that's it. We can keep all foreigners out forever. So if immigration was your drive, you should be furious with people like Mark Francois and Brexit hardman Steve Baker and all the other puddings in the ERG, J-Dog, you know. You should be furious with all these characters because they stopped it. But you're not. You can't get furious with them because they've got the same coloured shirt on as you, the Brexit colour, whatever it is. Puce, I guess, purple, a sort of gammony puce. So that's the problem for me, and I'm being very personal today. For me, I would have wound my neck in by now if you had given me, and my God, is there any corner of the British media that's spoken about this issue in more depth and more honesty than us, you and me, every morning? If you'd just given me a few good reasons by now as to why we should actually just crack on down this path. All right? We're not going to stop all foreigners from coming in, James. We're just going to... And then I say, yeah, but we could have done that in the European Union. Why are we leaving? Oh, we'll be able to do this, and this. Yes, it turns out we won't. Or if we do, it will be a watered-down, diluted version of what we can already do. Oh, well, they make our laws. Well, they clearly don't, because the Supreme Court has just given Boris Johnson the mother of all mullerings, unanimously. Well, we want a sovereign part. Well, that's not true either, because Parliament is now getting a kicking from the people that told you it didn't have enough power for having too much power. So every time you think, oh, all right, let's just go along with it now for the sake of our sanity, our collective sanity, so that we can actually spend next Christmas all sitting around the same table in some families, thankfully not in mine, peacefully. But I don't see how you can, and I find it astonishing. And I feel a bit of guilt, actually, because I can pat myself on the back for having predicted most of it and having spent more time talking to people on the other side of the argument than probably any Remainer in the country. But I can't answer this question either, despite all those qualifications and experiences. But why are we still here? On this side of the argument, I think we should probably call the whole thing offside of the argument, my position is clear. It is this. We've been doing it for 3.5 years and you haven't given me one good reason to do so. One good reason to do so. What's the reason on the other side? Is apart from we have to crack on with it because we have to crack on with it, the parental, refrain, isn't it, throughout the ages, because I say so. Every child feels the first stirrings of existential frustration when a parent insists upon some unjust course of action with that famous phrase, because I say so. Every child in history has rebelled against the ludicrous hollowness of that catchphrase. And yet that appears to be Britain's new motto. Why are we doing this ridiculous thing? Because I say so. Say, I don't know, it's not 17.4 million people anymore, regardless of how often that figure gets bandied about. Because we say so. Yeah, but why? So let's try and answer that question today. 0345 6060 973. How is this going to be good for the country? How? If we crash out at the end of next month, it's Tuesday, I said yet to Theo it was Monday. October starts on Tuesday, #fake news. At the end of next month, we could crash out. And I think, and again, this is theory, not analysis as such, I think that the talk of negotiation or securing a deal is so much hogwash. I was 50-50 on that until Johnson stood up in Parliament the other night and essentially told everybody that wasn't saluting him and doffing their cap and tugging their forelock to F off. The plan is clearly just to crash out, win an election, and then get 5 years to paper over the cracks that they will have caused themselves and hope that they don't become fissures and fractures and canyons. It's incredible. What is going to get better? 0345 6060 973. If it was all about immigration, then you must be furious with the ERG and other Conservative MPs who scuppered the withdrawal agreement after Theresa May secured the abolition of freedom of movement of people. And if it wasn't about immigration, then what is it that explains your desire to carry on with this thing that we voted for in 2016? I just want to know. What are the things that... Actually, let's make it personal. What can I look forward to? 0345 6060 973. Or what can you look forward to? 21 minutes after 10 is the time. Richie is in Stansted to kick things off. Come on, Richie, let's start our list.
Hi, James. Okay, so to just be really clear, I voted Remain.
Oh.
And I campaigned, on social media amongst my friends for Remain and looked into all the arguments and wasn't convinced by any of... I wasn't totally convinced by any of the Leave arguments. I thought Remain was the stronger position, and I still do. But I think in answer to your question, the one reason why we should still be pursuing Leave is because more people voted to Leave than voted to Remain. And the arguments...
it's almost like you didn't hear my carefully considered, painstakingly constructed introduction. That's the what, not the why. What's going to be good about it after we leave?
I don't think it matters. I think it's
I don't care whether you think it matters or not, man. That's the question I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, I think as long as...
Because of course it matters. If the answer is nothing but we have to do it anyway, then of course it matters. Because it's insane to say we have to do this thing even though everyone knows there is no benefit to it. So I just want to know what the benefits are.
Because we would be abiding by democracy.
Yes, but what are the benefits?
That is a benefit in and of itself.
Yes, I filed that one. In the introduction, I said the numbers, that we have to do it because we have to do it, the parental parallels because I say so. What will get better in your life or mine?
Well, for example, if you are a passionate Remainer, you could hold your head up high and possibly start to join some movement to rejoin the EU.
Yeah, that's not a good reason to. So a good reason to leave is that we could unleave at some point subsequently.
Yes, yeah.
I'm being a bit unfair to you because you are in good faith, really trying to at least cobble together some sort of platform of positivity. But today's I know you do. That's what I mean. Yes, yeah. but that's not the phone in today. The phone in today is, what's on the list of things that we can look forward to as improvements in our national interest, measurable improvements in the national performance, whether they're economic or...
But James, wasn't that the debate that we should have had and did have in the run-up to the vote?
No, it's the debate we should have had. It's not the debate we did have.
Yeah, well...
Because everything got shouted down as Project Fear by people who are now saying, if you don't do this thing that that we have to do, that we can't tell you any benefits of, but if you don't do it, there'll be riots.
Oh, trust me, I was no fan of the tone or nature of the debate on any side, and I think many...
But it's not. I mean, isn't it interesting that we can have a relatively civilised conversation, but both dancing around the fact that there aren't any benefits? And it was sold. It was sold to 17.4 million people as an improvement to their life. So you're perfectly entitled to say no, we have to do it because of the numbers, because of the result, because of democracy. But I am like the ombudsman. I'm like Which magazine? You've gone into a shop, you've bought something because it had a shiny picture on the cover of the box of a nice big toaster, and you've got it home, and you've opened the box, and it's full of leaves. So do you have to keep that box full of leaves even though you thought it was a toaster because that's what you voted for, Richie?
But we both voted Remain. So, for example, one of my very articulate...
How dare you ignore my painstakingly constructed analogy just as contemptuously as you've ignored my introduction? My job is to say it's not fair to make people keep leaves when they thought they were buying a toaster. So you need to tell me the benefits of a box full of leaves.
Okay, from the words of one of my leader friends, for example, leaving the CAP is one of his passions, which obviously takes up a huge amount of the EU budget.
The Common Agricultural Policy.
Common Agricultural.
You can see that. Yeah. Why are the NFU so spooked by the prospect of a no-deal Brexit then?
I said I didn't accept the arguments, but he very much believes in it.
But why does the National Farmers Union describe it as catastrophic? It's possible that the people that run the National Farmers Union might have a slightly better grasp of the facts than your pal. I don't know, but, where do those of us on the fence go? Who do we look to? Your mate or the National Farmers Union? 10:26 is the time. John is in Grimsby. John, how is my life going to get better?
Well, hopefully I'm going to get a pay rise. I've not had one since 2008. Good morning, by the way.
Hello, mate.
I'm a truck driver in Grimsby, and since 2008 I've not had a pay rise. I've been laid off 4 different times as well, and every time at this companies I was at, I asked for a pay rise. Actually, my money's gone down since then.
Well, of course, and then when you factor in the fall in the pound, it's gone down even further, hasn't it, since 2016?
No, that's only the last 2 years or 3 years. I'm talking 2008.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 11 years.
The international financial crisis.
Are you going to let me finish?
I'm not talking, John.
You are. You said it's down to the crisis. Just let me finish what I've got to say, okay? And then you can, have your say.
I'm literally not talking, except to point out that I'm not talking.
You're talking now.
As I just said, except to point out that I'm not talking.
Okay, fair enough. Since 2008, I've not had a pay rise. I've been laid off 4 different times from different companies that, after I've been laid off, have employed an Eastern European because they're cheaper than I am. Every time I've been for a pay rise, when I've been at a company for 2 years or more, I've asked for a pay rise. They've said to me, see on that table over there, John, there's 100 applications there from Eastern European drivers that will do your job for £200 a week less than what I'm paying you. Now, if you was me, would you give me a pay rise? And what have I got to say? I can't really say anything, have I? I don't blame the Eastern Europeans, but when you've got uncontrolled borders and you've got companies that are unscrupulous and will undercut the British worker, what's the only thing you can do? You've got to try and stop all those workers coming in.
And you must have been gutted when you found out that we could have done and that successive governments, including the Conservatives, had elected not to. But
well, I agree with you.
So we don't have to leave the European Union to do any of the things that you've just described. Are you in a trade union?
No.
Well, see you then.
What do you mean, see you? What does that mean?
You've got no collective bargaining power, and you voted to actually surrender some of the rights and protections that have been put in place by European Union legislation that we've adopted in this country. Working time directive that we've opted out of. The Labour Party are saying that we will remove that veto. I don't want to fight with you, but there's no way you're going to be better off.
You're not giving me a fair crack of the whip.
Okay, well you keep talking then.
Okay. I'm saying even if I was in a union, which I don't want to be in anyway,
why not,
I still wouldn't have had a pay rise.
Why not?
Because I'm self-employed.
No, but why wouldn't you want to be in a union? Oh, you're self-employed. You're self-employed.
Yes.
Right.
I'm a self-employed truck driver that gets contracts with companies for X amount of years, so on and so forth.
And do you know, I hope you're right. I really do, John. That's all I can say. I hope that you are better off as a result of the pound going down, the economy suffering, and the Road Haulage Association describing... Hang on, no, you have to at least let me finish if you're going to accuse me of talking over you all the time. The Road Haulage Association have described the prospect of a no-deal Brexit in pretty much apocalyptic terms. I hope you're right and they're wrong. I really do.
Yeah, well, I don't believe them for 1 minute.
No, why would you? They're just... I mean, what do they know about road haulage?
Well, I know
what do the NFU know about farming?
What do they do? Most of those guys in that road haulage company have never drove a truck in their life. I have, and millions of other truck drivers that do it.
Well, it's not millions, is it? It's not millions, is it, John? It's not millions.
Sorry?
It's not millions, is it?
Well, it's 1.5 million.
Are you a member of the Road Haulage Association?
No, I'm not, no.
Okay.
No.
And when do you think the pay rise will arrive?
Of course it will arrive.
No, when?
When does it do? Well, when these people at Parliament finally get us out there, and then there isn't this influx of drivers all the time that's undercutting you.
And does that mean the cost
flow of cheap labour?
Does that mean the cost of everything you deliver will go up?
Why will it?
Because the deliverers are getting paid more.
No, it'll just mean the bonuses for the gaffers will come down.
Right.
That's where it all is.
So it's not the wages it's not the wages that are being paid to Eastern Europeans that's the problem. It's the size of your gaffers, even though you're self-employed. It's the size of your gaffers' bonuses.
Well, that as well. I mean, they're all in for it themselves, aren't they? The last person that's going to get anything out of these is the common man.
So when do you get your pay rise? When do you think you get your pay rise, mate?
I don't know, mate. How long's a piece of string with these idiots in Parliament?
Here's the question.
It's never going to happen, is it?
Here's the question. When do you think you're going to be better off? Let's put a date on it.
When we get out the EU.
Right. Because that will mean that there are smaller bonuses for your gaffers, even though you're self-employed, and fewer people applying for jobs driving trucks.
It doesn't mean that I haven't got a gaffer.
No, I know it doesn't. That's why you need a union.
Aren't you?
That's why you need a union.
No, I don't need a union at all.
That's how you challenge gaffers, mate. It's just you on your own or millions and millions of truck drivers. I mean it, John. I really do. I really, really, really hope you're right. And that somehow the predicted economic damage that everybody accepts, they're just arguing over the scale of it or how long it will be. You've heard them say there'll be short-term economic damage. The pound will suffer. Some of Boris Johnson's backers poised to make hundreds of millions of pound profits from the expected collapse in the pound. His own sister, John, I don't know if you're aware of this, his own sister yesterday suggested that the reason why Boris Johnson is pursuing the path that he's pursuing might be because so much money has been invested in a collapse in the pound that would follow a no-deal crash-out Brexit. But hand on heart, mate, I really hope all of those circumstances deliver a pay rise to you. I don't think it will. all right? And deep down, I don't think you do either. It doesn't happen to me very often, but I do occasionally envy the sort of the rhetoric of the right-wing knee-jerk. You're speaking to someone like the caller a moment ago, the lorry driver, who I just, in the interests of facts, the UK is currently estimated to have a shortfall of about 50,000 qualified drivers. Make of that what you will. That's the only figure I can find. But anyway, let's imagine that it is true that he might get a pay rise in the event of us leaving the European Union. Based on what measures? There'll be tariffs introduced. There'll be less trade done with our closest neighbours. There's already a shortfall of 50,000 people, and as a few of you have pointed out, I addressed this in my book. And I pointed out that my old newspaper, the Daily Express, spent years, that may even have been before 2008, writing stories about how immigration was undercutting wages while refusing to give their own journalists a pay rise. Over at the Daily Mail, cleaners joined a union, that's why I mention it, and threatened to strike in order to get a pay rise. And they were immigrants, but they unionised. And lo and behold, they got a pay rise. It breaks my heart. But the reason why I sometimes envy right-wing knee-jerk rhetoric is because what you can say to someone like John complaining about the fact that he hasn't had a pay rise since 2008, and whether he's blaming it on bosses or fat cats or banks or foreigners or immigrants or politicians, what you can say if you're a lazy right-wing commentator is, well, get a better job, mate, work harder, get on your bike, like Norman Tebbit advised. But I can't do that because I know it's not fair or honest or just. That's the price of not being a lazy right-wing knee-jerk merchant. I can't just tell, well, get a better job then. It's amazing, isn't it? It's the one thing, if you are in the business of right-wing rhetoric, it's everything is the fault of immigrants until it's not, and then it's your own fault. But, you know, we are where we are. The search for benefits continues. Gavin is in Nottingham. Gavin, what have you got?
Hi,
Hello.
I can't see. Great show, by the way.
It's
and
all
it's
right.
good to ask this question. Why
It's
are
a
we
genuine
leaving?
one, because you could, I think, if John had made a lot of sense and the idea that the country's most poorly paid people were going to be better paid, it would be brilliant and we could shake hands and agree. But all of the analysis is, even from people supporting a no-deal Brexit, is that things are going to get worse. They're only arguing over how much worse and for how long.
But this xenophobic and frankly racist tip, which I believe the Brexiteers are going for,
They are now.
to fool the common man, as they would like to call us, into thinking that Brexit is about preventing immigration, which it isn't. Brexit will benefit certain people in this country. Unfortunately, not me. I do not have offshore money. I do not have an offshore account.
Do you have a few
would
quid
not
invested on shorting the pound?
Unfortunately not.
Let's just hear briefly. I'll come back to you. I am coming back to you, but I just want to cross to some comments yesterday from, I'm going to say these words twice, the Prime Minister's sister. You'll remember that his brother has quit not just the government, not just the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister's brother is poised to walk away from politics completely after seeing Boris Johnson in office for about 10 minutes. Here is Boris Johnson's sister, the Prime Minister's sister, speaking yesterday.
For those who are grieving a mother, an MP and a friend, to say that the best way to honour her memory is to deliver the thing that she and her family campaigned against, which is Brexit. I know he did, and I think it was a very tasteless way of referring to the memory of a murdered MP, murdered by somebody who said Britain first, who is obviously of the far-right tendency.
That went well. We've got some gremlins in the system. That was Rachel Johnson describing the shameful employment of Joe Cox. She goes on to say, maybe he's doing it because so many people have got so much money invested in shorting the pound. We'll find the right clip in a moment and return to you now, Gavin. Where were we?
So I believe that I follow Ben Bradley. He's my local MP. I find it fascinating, for example, that his main posts have been about them wanting to get rid of public schools by the Labour Party.
Yes.
Now, that is a policy and something that he's objecting to. I live in Mansfield, which is one of the poorest districts in this country, and yet that's what he's going for. The Conservative Party have always been for the rich. Brexit is for the rich. That is the only people it will benefit. And yet people, the lowest paid people in this country, who are going to be most affected by us exiting Europe, who will lose all of their rights. Make no mistake, we will lose our rights as workers within this country.
But you only have to
And it
read
would
that
just
book published by Priti Patel and Kwasi Kwarteng and Dominic Raab and others. I forget what it was called, but the one that described British workers as among the idlest in the world. And Raab and Priti Patel now hold 2 of the 4 highest offices of state. I mean, and your man, our friend in Grimsby, somehow thinks they're on his side. That's perhaps the greatest mystery of all.
That is what confuses me the most. The people who this is going to affect the most. Make no mistake, there will be mass redundancies across this country. People will be expected to work
forgive me
long
for
hours.
interrupting you, even if there's only one redundancy, it makes a mockery of Brexit, because Brexit is supposed to make things better.
I'll tell you what my problem is. There seems to be a strange blind fervour in following something that I think deep down all politicians know this is catastrophic for this country.
And that's why we can't...
It took so long to push through.
And that's why we can't wind our necks in, because you just want good reasons. And people in good faith try and give you one. A fewer foreigners means I'll be richer. It doesn't really work like that. It doesn't generally work like that. And even if it did, I have this appalling condition whereby I don't look at you and see your country of origin. I look at you and see an honest working person, and I don't care where you were born. And in protecting the rights of honest working people, the very, very, very worst thing you can do is divide and rule. And that's what they've done successfully. So he's so close, John in Grimsby. When he talked about the profits that his gaffers make, he was so close to getting it. But then, of course, that feels a little bit further out of reach. The profits that the gaffers make, the dividends that the shareholders get, the payouts that the investors make. There's a Polish bloke over there driving a truck and I'm not happy with my pay packet, so it's his fault. Or maybe it's not his fault, but it's my boss's fault for hiring him. And there are currently 50,000 shortages in the road haulage industry. And I think even the most cursory reading of what will happen if we do find ourselves compelled to introduce tariffs, etc., under so-called WTO terms, everything's going to get more expensive. And those are generally not circumstances in which employers look to increase their wage bill. It is, I think it's probably fair to say that people on the Remain side of the Brexit argument are a little less given to stubbornness and fractiousness than people on the other side. You just look at the sort of protests and the People's March and compare it with the kind of treatment that Anna Soubry and Gina Miller received. But it's a generalisation. So I am now ready to wind my neck in on this. I would probably vote for the withdrawal agreement if I was an MP, even though everybody knows that it is demonstrably inferior to leaving, to remaining. And of course, people who remain committed to Brexit but can't really tell you what it means are equally convinced that it is demonstrably inferior to Brexiting, even though it is Brexiting. So I would vote for the withdrawal agreement because of what is happening to our country. It is a bit like being given a choice between having one leg or no legs. You know that you'd be better off with 2 legs, but you don't actually have that choice anymore. And the risk of ending up with no legs means that you're voting to have 1 leg, because at least you can hop around the place, right? Speaking of analogies, here's one from Chris, who's in East Grinstead. He says, when you decide to decorate your bedroom, your intention is to improve it, but first you have to make it worse, stripping the walls and woodwork, lifting the carpets and generally messing it up. But then you put some stuff in the bin, have a wipe around and start painting. Things begin to improve. It's hard work, but it's worth it. So, you know, there's a balancing analogy there. But that's why I would now vote for the withdrawal agreement, because I've looked into the eyes of people who are swearing blind that they'll be better off with no legs than 2 legs. And they mean it. They believe it, you know? So if you've got the opportunity to end up with 1 leg, you probably would take it. That's at least how I feel right now. The question that has led us to this point is the one that still waits for an answer. I will give you, if you want, you can join John in Grimsby in suggesting that if we reduce the flow of foreigners into this country, then the wages of some of our lowest paid will rise. I don't believe that. I point at the 50,000 vacancies in the road haulage industry. I point at what the Road Haulage Association itself has said. I point at what tariffs and and the like will do to the industry. And I think there's only 1,500 licences issued so far to hauliers who will be able then to go into the European Union. If you're a truck driver and we leave with no deal, unless you confine your work exclusively to this country, and remember, everyone will be rushing to get a job that only drives in this country, I can't see how you think things are going to improve for you. But anyway, Robert's in Prestwick. Robert, what have we got?
Well, as a Scot, I probably have one out. I'm looking for Brexit. To me will mean Scotland will become independent.
Oh, but you know that doesn't count. You're not playing the game, Robert.
Well, I know, but I mean, I voted Leave. I voted Leave because I'm older. I looked at it and I thought the common agriculture, the fisheries. But then, since then, I suddenly realised that wasn't really a good idea.
No.
And I have changed my mind, but
Yes.
I'm really fed up of people telling me that I'm one of the 17.4 million that voted for this. I didn't vote for this at all. And I
No,
wish
but
to
it's
stop voting.
if the whole mission is built upon fatuous slogans, you can't really turn around now and complain about fatuous slogans. I mean, in terms of... Go on.
I do feel sorry. Scotland has an out.
Does it, though? How's that going to work?
Well, we have another referendum. We vote for independence and we rejoin Europe.
I can't.
We stay in Europe.
But then we'd have to have a border across between here. We'd have to have another border in North Berwick, Berwick upon Tweed.
But there will be no border. There will be free movement. Less of all the arguments of the Leave before. But the main thing is, I think what will happen for England and the rest of the people who are avid, the religion is Brexit, is they'll spend the next years, if they do leave, no matter if it is a withdrawal agreement or a full Brexit, the Brexit people will spend the next 5 years blaming the Remainers because they moan so much that it's not that good.
Oh, they'll blame anybody except themselves. That's part of the problem. It's why the questions have to be the ones that we're asking today, which is what is actually going to get better. I believe I'll get a pay rise. That works as an answer, but I don't really want... I don't want to go down this road because I always tie myself in a tartan knot, but I don't want...
But the good news is...
I don't want you to take Scotland away from me.
But the good news, why don't you just come and live in Scotland? Have your programme from Scotland. Become a Scot by living here. Join the family of nations.
Sorry,
again.
I will put your kind invitation on the growing pile of invitations from various other countries, suggesting that I might like to relocate.
And as I say up here, the tea's on.
The tea's on. I can't say fair. Is it sausage for tea? 10:54 is the time. Jim's in Spalding. Jim, what have we got?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jim.
I think the first thing to say, I think the immediate effect, the short to medium term effect, is going to be fairly catastrophic economically. I think a couple of flippant benefits, if you like, in post-Brexit, if we leave with a no deal, will be that there'll be a significant increase in civil servant jobs. I also think that one of the big beneficiaries...
So, to be, and I'm not being mischievous here, but you're suggesting that an increase in unelected bureaucrats, but at least there'll be British ones.
No, I'm not really. I'm just talking about an increase in jobs. So for people like for the immigration officers, for
customs guards,
imports,
yeah,
all of those sorts of jobs. I think obviously the highly paid financiers are going to benefit. You've already been alluding to the...
I've got it now. Shall I play the correct clip, Jim, and hopefully drag us all out of amateur hour? Are you ready for this? This is the Prime Minister's sister.
It also could be from, who knows, people who have invested billions in shorting the pound or shorting the country in the expectation of a no-deal Brexit. We don't know.
We don't know, but that is Rachel Johnson speculating on why her brother is doing what he's doing. Their other brother, of course, has walked away from politics, or is poised to walk away from politics altogether. So you are being facetious. You are...
I am. Yes. I am. But if I can just sort of finish my
facetiousness. Yes.
Yes, my facetious soapbox is, there's other elements for the financiers such as Jacob Rees-Mogg in that they'll be avoiding the anti-tax avoidance directive.
I don't know that he will personally. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. I know that they've moved 2 funds to Dublin because, for as yet undisclosed reasons, somehow having funds based in the European Union is infinitely preferable to having funds not based in the European Union. And this looming tax directive is crucial, but I'm uncomfortable with you fingering him personally on that front.
It's more his ilk, because obviously as an MP he has to declare everything that he has. So
no, that's not a fair comment on the J-Dog, although he did mislead the Queen, so, you take your chances.
Yeah, exactly. I'm more thinking of the various backers for the Tories and the Brexit Party, people like Aaron Banks, who... possibly. We don't know if they're invested in shorting the pound, so I'm uncomfortable with you mentioning names. I think Crispin Odey is, so we could mention his name, Rupert Murdoch's former son-in-law, who is a generous backer of our current Prime Minister and also made donations to the Leave campaign, and I think has boasted about the amount of money he made when the pound went down that night. It's odd, isn't it? I keep having this image of a photograph of some sort of gurning clown pointing at a graph of the pound plummeting with this massive grin on his face, but I think I must be just getting flashbacks to an old Batman film. It's 10:58. Jim, have you finished your facetiousness, or would you like another? There were actually, I was looking for 2 pieces of silver lining.
Yes.
One was, if we do go out with a political, no-deal Brexit, I think it'll be a grenade that will be a catalyst for political reform in this country. I think the whole system of tribal politics has been exposed, and I think it'll come down.
I take that to the bank, and I hope you're right. Well, what about our friend in Grimsby? If he doesn't get a pay rise as a result of crashing out of the European Union with no deal, if he quite possibly loses his job because there's going to be a lot less work to go round, how do we turn that into a positive in the context of political discourse?
In the short term, James, I can't see that there is any way of turning that into a positive. I think any positives that might come from it are going to be medium to long term at the shortest.
And that counts as optimistic. And, of course, all of the available economic analysis agrees with you. So why don't you wind your neck in, James? Because of John in Grimsby. Because he's still voting for Christmas, despite being a potential turkey. And it's a very thankless task sometimes. So you could tell John wasn't my biggest fan, didn't particularly like me or my questions. But he is going to be even worse off than he is now, according to every available measure. So that's why you can't wind your neck in. It's a bit like saying, look, I know the house is on fire, but for God's sake, will you turn off that alarm, even though the top 3 floors of the house are still full? What do you want? I want 2 legs. What's the choice? Well, 1 leg or no leg now, mate. Well, why? Why have we let them do this to us? A visionary, or is he a fool? The jury's out, understandably. 22 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why can't we just all get on with each other? Answer, because, and I really hate this, stubbornness almost, but you'll know that I've got more evidence than most that when you ask this question, the answers are thin on the ground. What's going to get better? 0345 606 0973. And people who think their life is going to get better, despite all of the available evidence suggesting their life is probably going to get worse, I don't know that they necessarily help us move towards a place of peace. Because, for my money, they're victims of a con, you know? They believed the German car industry would come to... I don't remember actually what the German car industry was going to do. It was Digby Pudding Jones, wasn't it? So he knew, didn't just think, he knew that the bosses of BMW and Mercedes would go to Mrs. Merkel and they would say this, that and the other. Well, that wasn't true, was it? We were going to be better off as a country. That doesn't really work either. You know, yes, we pay money into the European Union, but what we get in return, in measurable economic terms, far outweighs what we put in. And if, God forbid, a politician you didn't like ended up in charge of this country, and ran the economy into the ground, then obviously European Union membership would see that scale reverse. And as members, we would enjoy, as I think we have done on occasion in the past, we would enjoy more. We would put in less. That's how it works in partnerships. When one partner is doing well, it is to the benefit of the partner doing less well. When the roles are reversed, so is the imbalance, so are the benefits. Incredible. And that's it. I really, now I've had enough, you know? I'm just signed to write another book. I want to write about something else. I want to write a novel. I want to write a thriller about a radio presenter who solves crimes by night with his trusty sidekick, Keith, and his glamorous assistant, also Keith. But I can't. I've got to write about blinking politics again. Georgia's in Cranbrook. Help me out, Georgia.
Hello. We've spoken before, and I listen to you a lot. And what strikes me about Brexit and where we are now is that we're deep in psychological warfare that us on the Remain side didn't understand.
Yes.
And a lot of it became clear watching Parliament when Miss Johnson came back the other day. I watched it carefully. He had obviously been instructed or had decided himself to keep shouting sound bites. And
focus groups. It's been focus groups. I had a bit of a tip-off from one of my snouts yesterday, and this word surrender act is playing very, very well in focus groups with exactly the same people that the £350 million lie on the side of a bus played very, very well with in focus groups. They all talk about Dominic Cummings and Steve Bannon as if they're geniuses. All they do is open up an all-you-can-eat buffet for people's basest instincts. And it turns out that our friends and our neighbours and our colleagues and our pals and our old schoolmates, they can't get enough of that all-you-can-eat bile-based buffet. Sorry, Georgia, I don't know where that came from. I apologise.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But the question is, OK, we're understanding that now. We're understanding what's happening. Now, I am British and I love Britain and I'm on the side of the British, though not to the detriment of anyone else, right? I'm a Girl Guide leader, I'm a Sunday school teacher, I'm an NHS worker. And I can see my people, if you want to call them that, and by that I mean anyone who lives here and chooses to make their home here, I can see them being led towards disaster by people who don't care about them. And people like me who do care about us all...
Now we sound patronising, you see. But I love the way you said care about us all. I can learn from you. No, but instead of saying I care about the poor saps who've been conned, just say I care about us all. That's good advice. Thank you, Georgia.
And I think we need, perhaps, James, to take a step back and think, right, we've got a group of people here who plotted this, who had a very difficult task. I believe they wanted to financially enrich themselves and reduce workers' rights in this country. And so they've had to get people who will be severely disadvantaged by Brexit to vote for them. And the way the brain works, I'm sure you know a bit about the brain, the way it works, when you're messing about with the limbic system, if you can get almost a Pavlovian emotional response to things once you've got people in your camp, that bit of your brain kicks in quicker and makes you agree with things. And my example of this is that lady, the MP, I'm sorry I've forgotten her name, Paula, I think.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, who made very valid points about how scared she was. While she was doing that, she pulled some terrible faces because she was frightened and enraged. Now, those faces have been made into a meme, or whatever they're called, all over Twitter with the face of hate underneath.
Right.
So when reasonable people come against unreasonable people saying terrible things, we do pull funny faces. And they knew that was going to happen, and they then used that rather than concentrating on the arguments. And we've got
this has always been. I don't think this is new. I've always described this as giving people an excuse not to think about things, just to feel.
Yes.
You know, so here you go, feel some anger. Here you go, feel some disgust. Here you go, feel some derision. Here you go, feel some envy, feel some fury. And that's all that they've done. That's all that they've done for 4 years. Feel some anger about these foreigners. Feel some anger about these elites because a bloke getting paid £250,000 a year by the owners of the Ritz to tell you that bus drivers are the real metropolitan elite, or the sons of bus drivers are the real metropolitan elite, not the people that own the actual Ritz. And if you don't think it works, and that perhaps, and this will sound patronising, that is where the likes of you and I struggle, because you can't quite understand a life unthought.
No, I think this Brexit thing has become an emblem for people who've had a really wretched deal a lot of the time.
No,
it has been unfair.
I'm going to dismantle you, because the massive engine that drove Brexit was South-East elderly voters who've actually had a better economic deal than any other British people in history. But the owners of the Ritz pay people to claim that it all came from the dispossessed industrial north, and it's all about factory workers in Doncaster. It's not. It's about comfortable. Look at the Tory membership.
Listen, I live in Kent. I'll give you that.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
But Voltaire, okay, this is going to sound really sniffy, but I don't mean it. Voltaire, I think, was a really good bloke. And things go in cycles in history. And I think on our side, we do need to have a look back and see what's gone on where.
Yes.
Because then you learn, don't you? And we've just reacted. And it is old Boris chucking his dead cats around. Yes. Now we're all discussing how he talked, saying humbug. I absolutely agree about MP's safety. It's paramount, but it is a bit of a dead cat at the same time, because we're all discussing it, and we should be discussing the harm. Anyway, good old Voltaire, he said, if you get people to believe absurdities, they'll commit atrocities.
Oh, he did, didn't he? And now they're threatening to riot.
Exactly.
That is literally the front page of the Times today. Senior allies of Boris Johnson have warned that Britain will face civil unrest if Brexit is frustrated. Give me that line again.
Get people to believe absurdities and they'll commit atrocities.
They've almost proved it with that threat, haven't they?
I think. And I think on our side, we've got to reclaim terms that because people say to me, my friends around here, they'll say, yeah, okay, Georgia, so we'll be worse off, we'll be this, we'll be that, but we'll get our sovereignty back. And some of us are patriots. They're often saying that, we're patriots, and we put the country first. And I go,
they must be furious about Parliament being shut down unlawfully then.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, right, they're not. And I'm a patriot, and my patriotism, we're not here on this earth for long, is looking after people, both around you and elsewhere, and caring for people. And that's why I've worked on the NHS, for heaven's sake.
How dare you?
But we got a bit of it. When the junior doctors kicked off quite reasonably, we saw the foreshadowing of this, because they were demonised, and they're good people.
I know. It was firefighters for me before that, people that I used to consider friends in the industry. When I was a newspaper person, I would read columns attacking firefighters, and it happened to me live on the radio, but so it's just a tiny proportion of people listening back then compared to now. But it actually happened to me live on the radio. I became political during a firefighters dispute, because I couldn't believe people in an industry that I loved, and newspapers, my dad's industry, I couldn't believe that they were attacking firefighters. Almost nostalgic for the days when it was just firefighters getting a kicking from the right-wing media. Now we can add to that list, as Georgia reminds us, junior doctors and anybody who wasn't born, well, not anybody who wasn't born in Britain, because, of course, that would include Boris Johnson. I think we should have a proper chat about that tax directive that everyone keeps mentioning. It does come into effect in January of 2020, but whether or not it is quite as significant a lever or perhaps driver for prominent wealthy leavers, there's two different meanings of lever there, you see? That's clever. I don't actually know, and again, I think it's very important to admit one's ignorance, so we shall hopefully have a look at that maybe next week. We've got a couple of guests coming in this week. I told you some time ago that I did a gig for, I can't remember actually, I think it was Facebook, one of the massive online outfits. And it was advertising people. You do them sometimes for LBC as well, you know. You get wheeled out in front of the people with the money in order to encourage them to spend it on your work, your radio station or what have you. And a chap came up to me afterwards, a couple of chaps, and they were really important because my host whispered in my ear, they're really important. And they ran household name advertising agencies. I won't go any further than that because I haven't asked their permission to divulge what they said. And I'm pretty sure, for the record, they wouldn't mind at all, but, you know, it's important to be professional, even when no one else is. Actually, especially when no one else is. They said to me, do you know that if we tried to sell cat food or washing powder, employing the tactics that political parties or political campaigns use in their advertising, we'd be out of business by brunch? And it really stayed with me because I'd never really thought of that. And this is independent, though relevant to Brexit. Independent of, though relevant to. And there are attempts to both address and redress this state of affairs underway, and we're going to talk to one of the people who is leading those attempts shortly. I don't know a great deal about it. I just remember reeling in shock when highly, highly senior advertising professionals pointed out to me something that should have been obvious. If we did that when we were selling washing powder or cat food, we'd be crucified. But political parties and political campaigns can do it with, it seems, relative impunity. A little bit more on that in a moment. And another little observation, actually, because days like today when we're asking questions about the potential benefits of Brexit, and there aren't any, and callers ring in, and although, you know, we generally part in a warmer fashion than we did a couple of years ago, because my frustration has given way to a sort of bewildered sympathy, it doesn't stop the people with bulldog avatars and pictures of Richard the Lionheart on their Facebook or Twitter profiles insulting the callers and saying, why do you always pick the stupid ones? Or this is someone who was... It's incredibly... And I mention it only to point out that you can't call these people stupid and still claim the 17.4 million mandate, you see? Because what you're doing, if you are simultaneously calling the handful of Leave voters with the guts to try to explain a benefit coming to the country as a result of crashing out of the European Union at the end of next month, if you're saying 17.4 million people want it, but they're really, really stupid, you've kind of boxed yourself into yet another embarrassing corner. And for the record, I don't think you're too thick to realise that. I never will. But the people that boxed you into the corner, they're pretty sure you are. Robert's in Kingston. Robert, benefits?
There aren't any.
There must be some.
Yeah, there aren't any. Well, basically, thanks for signing my book the other day.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Take it as a business. Every business needs a little bit of luck. Needs a bit of luck, a good idea,
yes,
and the right timing. Okay? Brexit was always bubbling away since thank you. Since the Britain joined the EU. Britain didn't join the EU a while after it was invented, because Brits won't trust it, because they're never exactly happy, because the superiority that is in the blood, which is, everyone kind of knows about it.
Well, that's all right. I don't want to sort of just play frustration tennis. I genuinely would like to write stuff down. So we've got John Ingram. John Ingramsby thinks he'll get a pay rise. I don't think he's right, but at least it's something to write down on our list. The sort of... Brian thinks that... I can't remember what Brian thinks. The fella in Sheffield, something about train drivers not having strong unions. I mean, there must be some grounds for optimism somewhere. It can't all just be, don't talk about Brexit, talk about surrendering, talk about sabotage, talk about enemies, talk about betrayals, because that's really scary. It's scary that so many people would go along with the second stage, the third stage, and the fourth stage of the con. I get the first stage, but now we're in the end stage, and people are still falling for this nonsense.
James, the international financial crisis was the time when it was triggered. It was triggered, and then the people like Farage, who were always waiting for something like that because they had nothing else to do. They weren't very good in business, as you mentioned in the interview with them. Well,
I have no idea whether he was any good in business or not. I know that the last company of which he was chairman got a winding up order from the Inland Revenue, and he said at the time that they were definitely going to settle their debts. It's on my to-do list. I keep meaning to find out whether they ever did. But who cares? The man lies about assassination attempts. It doesn't matter when you bust him. You catch him with his trousers down. People still fall for it because of the impulses you describe. Because it's somehow, there's an enemy over there. There isn't. But if you believe that there is, the bloke who tells you that he's going to fight that enemy is somehow your friend.
Yeah, the worst thing is that this is a bit too late for it to do anything to make it good. Because Brexit's not going to be good. Remaining's not going to be good. Why? Because
so many people will be so furious.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not sure if you fare with Rory Stewart. because
I think he was probably right.
He is right.
Well, he's selling one leg. He doesn't put it in quite these terms himself. He's saying, look, I know one leg is not as good as two legs, but listen, half the country wants no legs, so let's go with one leg.
That's exactly right. And
I think
the people were sold the dream that I've got an analogy. People were sold the dream that you can not pay taxes, you can stop paying taxes, and we will improve your public services and everything that you're suffering with.
Yes.
And the taxes won't really go into the public services. The taxes will go into these rich people that you don't like.
Well, and that is the same astonishing contortion that sees the owners of the Ritz Hotel paying people like Johnson and Farage hundreds of thousands of pounds to portray people like you as the elites. That is it. I mean, you know, if they can pull that one off, then lying about assassination attempts is like a walk in the park, as Dominic Cummings might say. Hi, James, says Mike in St Albans. Tim Witherspoon is a successful businessman. I think you would agree. But less money in our pockets if we leave probably means less trips to the pub, yet he voted leave. Isn't he one of those expert business people that you speak about? Again, Mike, I'm going to pay you the compliment of thinking that you don't realise your mistake rather than accusing you of deliberately being obtuse. No, Tim Martin, which is his name, not Witherspoon, he's the head of Wetherspoon Pubs, is not one of the business people that I speak about when I refer to the massive majority of business people who contend that Brexit will be an economic disaster. He's one of the tiny minority of business people who argue that it will be a good idea. And yes, you're right. A fall in the pound is bad for business. That is one of the reasons why the pre-tax profit fell for him. One of the reasons why pre-tax profits fell for him last year by about 5%. So, you know, I hope you'll accept the compliment I paid you when I treated your comment as being in good faith, rather than accusing you of having either fallen for some nonsense or put on your blinkers before you got your phone out. And I'd like to introduce you to Alex Tate, who heads up the Coalition for Reform in Political Advertising, something that should have been an issue that should have been close to my heart for a long time, but hasn't been, because I didn't really realise the extent of the problem. Have I described it accurately? And why have you set up the Coalition for Reform in Political Advertising?
Well, our campaign is essentially about protecting democracy. It's about updating the rules around political advertising that are woefully out of date and actually weren't consulted on before Facebook, for example, was around. One of the key things we want to address is the fact that politicians and political advertisers can essentially lie in their adverts. There's no requirement.
Just even after all this time, I still find the baldness of those words almost undigestible. It's so casually offered up, but so true.
And it is incredible, isn't it?
Yes.
So if you're... My background is as an advertiser, and you can't say, as a normal advertiser, for example, Guinness gives you strength, but you can say, we're giving Europe £350 million a week. And there are lots of examples.
You have to even say probably the best lager in the world. You can't say best for Britain or best for the future, or this is the best path that we will take. You can say it in politics. You can't say it with beer.
Exactly, yeah. But there are examples on both sides of the Brexit debate. We're a politically neutral organisation, and actually during Brexit there were examples on the Remain side too. There was a door drop that went to a lot of households in the UK, for example, saying that it will cost every household
£4,300.
That's right. You know it well.
I do.
You know it well.
Yes.
And
BBC reality check picked that one apart.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, and actually quite a few fact checkers. And that was based on a sort of economic forecast, not a household forecast. So we think there is lots of rules for normal advertising. It's a loophole. It's just a gap for political advertising, and we think a regulator like the Advertising Standards Authority, who you can complain to and who can withdraw ads, should have the governance over political ads.
So where does the resistance come from?
So the barrier historically has been the political parties agreeing to change. So as part of our campaign, we're getting and aiming to get the support of different political parties. So we've got the support of the Green Party so far, the Independent Group for Change, and we're talking to various other parties at the moment. I think the amount of time taken up discussing Brexit has been a factor, actually, because this has been talked about for a couple of years, and it's somewhat incredible that literally nothing has changed. But ultimately, we do need all of the parties to agree to this as stakeholders. Yeah, so getting alignment between the parties has been an issue.
When did the penny drop for you? Because I mean, I don't have a background in advertising, although like you, I rely upon it for my livelihood. It was just two fellas that came up to me last year at an event as I came off the stage and just compared political advertising to cat food advertising, and I was actually quite taken aback, and then I was embarrassed for not having realised, because a lot of it is quite self-evident. When was your moment like that, if you had one?
I think it's over the last couple of years.
So it's been an incremental development rather than a sort of guillotine moment.
That's right, yeah, and I think content and the sort of what's in an advert is often, as an advertiser, and having done a lot of analysis of ad campaigns, is often the most impactful part of an ad campaign. And it's often overlooked, actually, with lots of other areas. There are other areas as well that are really important. So people talk about what's called dark advertising in political ads. So if you put a political ad in a newspaper, for example, it's evident, everyone can see it. If there's a party political broadcast on the TV, everyone can see that too. But there's a lot of ads in social media, for example, that only the recipient, only the person it's delivered to can see. And what we think should happen is there should be an independent database of all of the adverts that are running for political ads, so that anyone from academics, researchers, journalists, members of the public can see that in a very transparent way.
Because they harvest data in order to direct adverts at people who will fall for what we have discovered, things that aren't true,
which is a combination of the message and the targeting, and fundamentally.
So unless someone who's been identified as susceptible to the con reports the con will go unreported.
Yes, and there's no one to report it to as well.
Well, there's a minor problem there as well.
Yeah, indeed.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Well, it's been talked about, and actually as an issue, it's not just been talked about for the last couple of years. There's an issue as well around around funding, for example. There's something called imprints, which is basically saying who's funding an ad, and there's a requirement for all non-digital ads to carry an imprint. But actually digital ads have no requirement. Again, it's another loophole that hasn't been updated for the digital age.
Absolutely
the Electoral Commission has been talking about this since the early 2000s and demanding it. And despite all of the heat of light around all of this, literally nothing has happened. It's really, really incredible. One of the things that as we barrel towards a general election, one of the things we think is really important now that the House is sitting again is actually to try to get through emergency legislation. We're going to have a rerun of exactly the same issues that happened in 2015, that happened in the Brexit referendum, in the upcoming general election, unless the rules are changed. And that is just a fact.
Arguably is why we end up doing phone-ins like the one we've been doing today, which is essentially hinged upon people who believe stuff that isn't true still 3.5 years after that. And to clarify and to stress that this is non-partisan, this is sideless. The two examples here, Turkey is joining the EU, that Vote Leave advert, population 76 million. Boris Johnson, I think, lied about having mentioned Turkey during the referendum campaign. So it's like a sort of ripple effect. The original lie is the stone that's thrown into the pool, and then the politicians disseminate the dishonesty and the deceptions.
That's a great example, actually. So on the fact check on that, there are 36 steps that you have to go through if you want to join the EU. Turkey had done one of them, and actually at the end of that, every single member state...
In 10 years, one of them in 10 years.
Yes. And at the end of that process, every single member state needs to agree to it, including Hungary and several states.
And the United Kingdom.
And the United Kingdom.
So if we had elected a government that was opposed to Turkey's accession to the European Union, they could have enacted that in Parliament. I remember that. But to stress that this isn't an anti-Brexit or a pro-Brexit campaign, that GDP confusion as well was quite easy to understand once the deep digging had been done. They got household GDP per household mixed up with household income. So 4,300 for every household makes you go, aye, that's not something I want. But you needed more knowledge and understanding of where that number had come from, and it turned out to have come from an unreliable calculation or an unreliable source. But there's nothing to stop people from putting that through my letterbox.
That's right, yeah. And there's another example, just to take it off digital, because actually I think this applies to all media that are used for political advertising. There's another Remain example from the Brexit debate that was talking about how workers' rights, a visual depiction of how they'd be ripped up if we left the EU. And actually, when that was fact-checked, lots of workers' rights have existed before we joined the EU, and lots of fact-checkers found that to be misleading.
Yeah.
One of the key points around all of this as well, and I say as an advertising practitioner, is that One of the biggest effects on advertising, people can say, well, we're not stupid, we can just work out for ourselves if something's true or not.
Yes.
But advertising, one of the biggest effects of advertising is subconscious. And just through kind of frequency of repetition of an ad, and some of these ads can get huge reach across the UK population.
Yes.
There can be quite a subconscious effect on disinformation and misinformation taking hold. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's just critical there's, as soon as possible, an update in legislation.
And of course, our ultimate umbrella under which all of this shelters is the observation that we've heard a lot recently, that an uninformed democracy or a misinformed democracy is not really a democracy at all. Because, you know, it's all very well saying X million people voted for this, but if their reason for voting for this was a belief, for example, that, you know, the moon is made of cheese or unicorns exist, then is that really a democratic mandate or a proper result? How can people find out more, Alex, or indeed get involved in your creditable campaign?
So they can sign up at reformpoliticaladvertising.org, and we're going to be tracking the general election when it happens at our Twitter, which is at ClearPolitic5, so Clear Politics, if people want to follow us there.
Cool. And on a sort of slightly more personal level, why are you doing this? Because, I mean, everything you've said is something about which it's possible to care. Everybody sensible will recognise the importance of the issue, but, you know, our kids need shoes. We've got to do the school run. Why have you taken it upon yourself to do this at this point in your life and British political history?
We just to be clear, we don't have any funding. This is a self-funded campaign. We don't get paid for it. We don't take any salary.
This adds to the weight of my question, Alex.
Sure. So, yeah, so it's really out of I think just a frustration, actually, that is shared by the greater British public for basically a greater trust in the democratic process that we can see, obviously, is encountering a lot of problems at the moment. We did some research. We did some research, actually, to the wider British public with YouGov and Full Fact, and just asked the simple question. Well, one question, actually, was, are people aware that there are different rules for political ads to normal ads?
And they weren't. No, guilty.
And I would argue that actually makes misleading claims more impactful because of people subconsciously...
Because they presume it's abiding by the same rules as the beer advert or the Hoover advert.
There would be an assumption around that, I think. And also, we asked people, you know, do you think, equally weighted across Brexit and Remain voters, do you think that factual claims in political ads should be accurate? And out of all of that, 3% said no. Equally weighted across the country.
And they're all working in Downing Street now. Thank you very much, Alex, from the Coalition for Reform in Political Advertising. That Twitter address, once more, is at Clear Politics with the S as a 5, but I shall retweet that later today from my own account at Mr. James O'B as well, just for ease of access. Good luck to you, mate.
Thanks.
And actually, on behalf of everybody who cares about facts, thank you. It's really interesting, that work, really important, actually, but it was quite telling, wasn't it, that one of the suggested answers to the question of why this isn't moving quicker or treated with more urgency is all the noise thrown up by the ongoing Brexit debacle. And, of course, it is a debacle, as is evidenced by the fact that all of its key supporters have abandoned the claims that they made in the run-up to the referendum and are now hoping that you will be sufficiently simple to fall for the slogans that they're now introducing into the public bloodstream. Slogans about betrayal and surrender and whatever have been focus grouped, and in exactly the same way as the fibs that they told you prior to 2016, all the talk of control and 350 million quid. It's the same psychological processes. So it pains me to say this. I suspect that we'll fall for it again. I don't know about you, but how many people are actually saying, hang on, Boris Johnson, could you explain to me how my life is going to improve or how my country is going to benefit? Or are you going, oh, boo, down with the other lot? That's all. So we're trying to make a list. Look, there's nothing on it at the moment, but that's the definition of optimism. We shall press on. Vanessa is on the Isle of Wight. Vanessa, what will you put on my list?
Right, I'm a Brexiteer.
We don't use that word. Sorry, nothing personal, because it makes you sound all sort of gallant and chivalrous. So we say Brexist or Brexiter?
Yeah, I'm a county councillor on the Isle of Wight, so I'm a politician, James, with a very small p. I
love that description.
Do the best for my constituents.
Good.
And of course, I'm appalled at the way our MPs have and are behaving. And to me, it shows how David Cameron and his cohort of MPs were completely out of touch with the country when the referendum came along, because they got the shock of their lives. He never, ever believed that he would lose.
Well, nor did Boris Johnson ever believe that he would win, of course.
Oh, listen, I don't disagree with you there.
Well,
Farage did. Farage began to smell that...
Oh, no, because, of course, he did announce on the night that they'd lost, and then the pound plummeted, and then mysteriously they won. And loads of people who'd bet on the pound plummeting made an absolute fortune. So he's possibly not the best example in this context.
No, but, I mean, he does have a political sense.
Yes, but he announced that they'd lost, and then watched the pound plummet, and then it emerged that they'd won, and that some of the organisations involved perhaps in those investments had conducted their own deeply sophisticated polling about what the result was likely to be. So let's just park that bit of it and focus on why you rang me.
Yeah, right. I want to leave the EU, and for two really big reasons. First of all, they are totally unaccountable with regard to the billions that we have given them and that the billions we are still giving them. In this country, if you did not publish proper audited accounts, you could end up in jail.
Yes, they do. They do publish audited accounts.
Do they?
Yes.
Well, I've been misled.
You just heard the guest we had talking about full fact and how important it is to do fact checks on this stuff. So here's the fact check on the question: is the EU's budget signed off by auditors? Claim: the EU's accounts haven't been signed off for years. That's the claim you've heard, like many of us.
Yes.
Conclusion: auditors say the accounts have been accurate since 2007, but they have historically recorded significant errors in how money is paid since their first audit in 1995. In the most recent year, they found a significant part of the EU's spending was largely error-free for the first time. So not only do they publish the accounts, they published the errors. So what was reason 2? We're going to have to hope it was better than reason 1, Vanessa.
I knew I'd get taken.
See, I don't think you should be laughing, Vanessa, politician with a small p. I really don't, because what you believed and what informed your vote was demonstrably wrong and easily discoverable to be wrong. But for the purposes of this programme, I will chuckle along with you. What's reason 2?
The difference between you and I is I'm an optimist.
No, I'm an optimist as well. I think now that I've shown you that you're wrong, you'll agree. That's optimism, right? Are you going to agree that you're wrong?
No, I'm not going to.
But I'm still optimistic that you will once the evidence becomes irresistible. Now, reason 2.
You're a pessimist. You believe...
No, I've just said I'm optimistic. I've given you the evidence that you're wrong, and I believe that you will acknowledge that because it's right there in front of you. But anyway, you said you had 2 reasons. The first one was nonsense. What's the second?
Right. Let me get my head in gear.
OK, you take your time.
We absolutely ditched the Commonwealth when we joined the EU. We nearly bankrupted New Zealand because they couldn't export lamb to us, their main export, obviously, more sheep in New Zealand than people, and we nearly bankrupted them.
I don't mean to be rude, but are you suggesting that for the last 30 years you haven't been able to buy New Zealand lamb in the United Kingdom?
I'm saying that when we got into the EU, we nearly bankrupted them. Jamaica was very dodgy anyway. We couldn't take their sugar anymore. We put them on the line. What I'm saying is
that's not true.
Commonwealth still out there,
yes, which
we can trade with without barriers.
Well, we can't, can we? We need to have trade agreements with them in order to trade without barriers.
I understood it.
Pardon?
People inside the government have been setting up trade agreements over the last year.
But we have loads of trade agreements already with all manner of countries. I'm going to ask this question very politely.
Yes, go on.
What is, I mean, the major rule of trade is regarded to be gravity, i.e. proximity. So it's a lot easier for you on the Isle of Wight. It's a lot easier for you to do your shopping in Douglas than it is for you to do your shopping in Dundee. You understand that?
Yeah.
Right. So the reason why our trade is more likely to be with countries that we're really close to is the same reason why you will be doing your shopping this week in the Isle of Wight rather than in the Bahamas. So what is it about the Commonwealth versus France, Germany, Italy and Spain that makes you think one is preferable to the other as a trading partner, despite being thousands of miles further away? I mean, New Zealand is a great example, isn't it? Why would you rather buy your lamb from Dundee than from Douglas? What is it about New Zealand that is to you emotionally or intellectually preferable to a country you could swim to?
Yeah, but James, New Zealand, that is their main source. They export lamb across the world. I suspect...
Yes, but why would you rather buy your lamb from the other side of the world than the other side of the English Channel? I just want to know.
I don't think anybody in Europe... Who in Europe produces lamb apart from the
You've never
Irish
seen
and
any
ourselves?
sheep in... Well, the Irish then, let's use them. Why would you rather buy it from New Zealand than Ireland?
Well, I wouldn't.
Well, what are we talking about now then, Vanessa?
Expensive. What I'm saying is there are countries out there that we can trade with and that we have traded.
But there are loads of countries out there that we do trade with.
Yeah, and I'm saying they are there, and that's the optimistic
Would it be
side.
really unfair of me to point out that New Zealand's third biggest trade partner at the moment is the EU?
I didn't know that, but then...
That's all right. There's no reason why you should. Do you have any idea at all what the figure might be for bilateral trading goods between the EU and New Zealand?
No.
And I have to look this stuff up when I'm talking to people like you, because I presume that you know, and I need to get across the facts before I challenge you or talk to you further. But I don't, and please don't take offence. Your answer to every evidence-based question I've asked you about the groundings for your views has been I don't know or I didn't know. How have you ended up in that position? It's 8.7 billion quid in 2017. So how, in a sentence, what point did you think you were making when you started talking about the Commonwealth?
What I was trying to get over is that I'm a fairly intelligent. I don't
want to cast any aspersions on your intelligence, and I wouldn't dream of doing so. I really wouldn't.
And I'm a fairly ordinary person. I personally want to get out of Brexit and have...
But I know that, but the reasons you've given for it have all turned out to be wrong.
Right. Let me do a little analogy. I get on extremely well with the people next door.
Yes.
Moved in, very, very nice people.
Yes.
However, there is no way I would give them my housekeeping and at the end of the year say to them, well, how have you spent my money? I want to control my money in my own way.
Right.
I believe in localism. I believe in having county councils.
And how do you view the prospect of a Jeremy Corbyn premiership?
On the island.
How do you view a Jeremy Corbyn premiership? Are you looking forward to that?
Do you need to ask?
Well, I do need to ask, because people like you, Vanessa, and I mean this very affectionately, when you talk about Britain and control and wanting to do it yourself, you never acknowledge the fact that you might end up with a Marxist government in place, and that you would prefer that to European Union membership because at least they'd be British Marxists.
No, I do not want that. And, of course, Jeremy Corbyn never liked the EU.
But we're going off on a slight tangent here, because your entire argument is built upon what I think, in a polite way, you could call nativism. I'd rather it was our people doing it than them, and that's why the Commonwealth seems more attractive to you than our nearest neighbours, the countries that we've conquered or even enslaved over the years. You have more affection for than the countries that we are geographically closest to, which is why I keep asking just for the sentence. The thing that's going to be better.
Two things to say.
Why would getting my lamb from New Zealand be better than getting my lamb from Ireland? Or Yorkshire?
I don't care where I buy it, quite frankly. I look at
But that was your only reason for leaving the European Union a minute ago.
What I'm saying is that we nearly destroyed New Zealand when we moved into the Union.
Yes. But they're still there. You do realise that.
Now,
and they're the European Union's third biggest trade. The European Union is their third biggest trade partner. So you want to cease to be part of the market that is their third biggest trade partner in order to help them.
But you're then missing the point about
quite
my
possibly,
optimism
Vanessa. Yes.
in that New Zealand reinvented themselves. And I'm sorry, James, but this country is quite capable of, we've enough brains here.
Yes.
Reinvent ourselves.
Right,
now,
I've got it. So when you say New Zealand was nearly destroyed, you're now saying we should nearly destroy ourselves?
No, I'm
not.
Right, I want to quote one other thing.
Okay, and then we'll call it quits and part as friends, Vanessa.
Hardly
right, but do look up, well, you're right, but I'm trying to be polite. Do look up the auditing stuff, though, because a lot of people fall for that. And if you are an elected politician, you kind of have a duty to tell your voters these truths.
Yeah, I feel slightly flattened, but then...
You mustn't feel flattened, you must feel enlightened.
Oh,
that's why I'm an optimist, you see?
Listen, one other thing that has really affected our island, under EU regulations, local authorities have to tender all contracts. I think the figure is over £75,000, right?
Yes.
Now, on the island, the contract for cutting grass, etc., a few years ago, was done by a local company, very efficient, etc., etc. The EU regulation came in. Very small company, did not have the expertise or the staff to deal with an 80-page contract specification.
Yes.
So they just couldn't cope with it.
Okay. Well, I will take that to the bank.
The contract then went to a mainland company. And do you know what happened? They charged us 10% more than the people on the island had been doing it for.
Yes.
And employed the company on the island.
But they were British, were they? That company you're complaining about?
Yes, they were.
Right.
But it cost
So, I mean, you realise that when we leave the European Union, it doesn't involve independence for the Isle of Wight.
No, but it will take away some of the bureaucracy that we are facing.
How will it?
Red tape.
How will it?
Because I presume, I am hoping, really hoping, we won't be subjected to those sort of edicts coming out of Brussels.
Do you not think it might be quite important to have rules and regulations in place regarding people with sort of chainsaws and large mowing machines?
Oh, do me a favour, James.
No? All right, I will. Thank you. It's 12:18. I don't think any of today's show really matters. I think we moved beyond what are the actual benefits. Middle of last year, you know, when would you pinpoint the... I think it was when people started telling us that they definitely voted to be poorer. And now we've gone full circle on today's programme with the gentleman in Grimsby still convinced that he's actually going to be richer. So there's 17.4 million people. Some of them think they're going to be poorer, some of them think they're going to be richer. But it's the will of all of them that means we have to do this thing that will, they believe, make them poorer and richer at the same time. If you take 17.4 million people as a homogenous block, then your head, by rights, should explode at about this point in the conversation. Because they are simultaneously, if you take them as a homogenous block, and you have to take them as a homogenous block if you want to give people an excuse not to actually think about things, then they are simultaneously arguing that they're going to be richer and poorer at the same time. And that's why we need to do what they wanted. 17.4 million people voted to be richer. 17.4 million people knew they were voting to be poorer. Or just possibly, reality check, just possibly 17.4 million people voted for completely disparate and different things. So to claim that they all voted for the same thing, ergo we have to do something that nobody voted for at the end of October, is pants, to use a very technical political term. But it doesn't matter, because what Boris Johnson is doing is wrapping a scarf around his neck and handing you some rotten tomatoes and telling you to turn off your brain and just start throwing the tomatoes. And he's even giving you permission now to use the sort of language that is routinely echoed in death threats issued to parliamentarians in a parliament that he shut down unlawfully. But you voted for Brexit because Parliament was losing its power. And now you're supporting a man who shut it down unlawfully and hired a man judged to be in contempt of that Parliament as his most senior aide. No wonder you don't want to think about things and you just want to shout about surrender. No wonder it's doing so well in focus groups. I mean, every time I've got this sort of... I don't know what it is, actually. It's probably because I did a philosophy degree, but I desperately tried to find the pithiest, the neatest, simplest little encapsulations of much broader truths. That's pretty close now, isn't it? You voted to leave the European Union because you were sick of British judges being overruled and you were sick of the British Parliament losing its powers to Brussels. Now, in just 3.5 years, you're offering your furious support to a man who shut down our Parliament unlawfully, was found to have done so by the unanimous judgment of our British Supreme Court full of British judges, and who hired a man as his most senior aide who was judged this year to have been in contempt of Parliament. And you wonder why I don't wind my neck in. Honestly. Gareth's in St Albans. Gareth, what have we got?
You pretty much took the words right out of my mouth. Firstly, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
No, I'm just a simple guy trying to get through life.
Me too, mate.
What you would probably call a condescending lefty liberal. What's it?
Yes. I just need to do a correction. Vanessa could have killed me then. Douglas is on the Isle of Man, isn't it? Not the Isle of Wight.
Isle of Man, yeah.
Yeah, I got that wrong.
To do the TT races.
No, I know. Why couldn't I think of a place on the Isle of Wight? I used to go there a lot. Sanditon. Didn't Queen Victoria have a place on the Isle of... Anyway, Vanessa, you missed a trick there when I said you do your shopping in Douglas. You could have embarrassed me live on the radio, and we would have been even more friendly when we parted. Anyway, back to Gareth, the condescending, sneering lefty Ramona. Well, we've got to have a couple of benefits on our list. Possibly not lamb.
Well, to answer your question that you've been asking for the past 2 hours, there are no benefits. There has been no benefits, nor there will be any benefits. Now, like I said, I'm just a simple guy. I'm a single dad with two young girls, one of which is going through her GCSEs.
Yes.
And I fear for her future. I fear for both of their futures, to be perfectly honest.
Well, my job now is to reassure you. I don't know that I can do a very good job, but I begin by asking you why you reach for such a serious fear. You fear for their futures. What do you mean by that?
Well, their job prospects, their career prospects, either inside this country or in the EU. They might want to think about having a job in Germany one day. I don't know. But
yes.
The will of the people, so to speak, have voted 17.4 million. That figure is now probably drastically reduced, and yet they still use that as a slogan.
And even if it isn't reduced, we speak every day to people who think that they're going to be richer and who voted knowing that they were going to be poorer. So how can 17.4 million people be a meaningful figure in the context of people who voted for two completely different outcomes? One voted to be richer, they'd be poorer.
Well, it isn't. And I listen to your show every day. Pretty much every day. I try to listen every day. And the catchphrase that you use, compassion for the conned, contempt for the con men.
Yes.
No, I've tried extremely hard to follow that. And it's got to a point now where I have nothing but anger and contempt for the conned, especially for the conned that think and they believe that this course of action is the right thing because of the view of, shall I say, a corrupt Prime Minister, an unelected bureaucrat and Dominic Cummings telling elected members of Parliament what to do?
Yes.
No. I don't think so. It should be the other way around.
Yes, I'm going to urge you to try to hang on to that compassion, though, because the alternative is too grisly. And I know it sometimes feels as if one side is allowed to say and do whatever they want, and the other side has to sit on their hands and have peaceful marches and all of that malarkey. But you heard Vanessa. Vanessa's not a bad person. She's got some slightly old-fashioned views about the Commonwealth, and she's fallen for some very, very persuasive nonsense about sheep and accounts, but she's not a bad person.
No, I didn't for 1 minute suggest that she was. I mean, she still is clinging on to this.
You can't have contempt for her.
I don't know.
Frustration, not anger. Sympathy, not contempt.
Frustration being the key word. I think frustration being the key word. I mean, before 2014, I was married. I was widowed.
Oh, man.
At the age of 31, I lost my wife to cancer, and I'm trying to get through life with my two girls, and thinking about things, and trying to provide the best possible life for them as much as I can. They
might not feel it every day, but they're lucky to have you.
But they will. once Brexit hits, and I think I've got a very, very bad feeling that it will. And when it does, I try not to think about it because I think the worst will happen. And
well, the worst won't happen.
They're being wrecked by people whose sole interest in this thing is for themselves and not for the people they claim to represent.
And that's why you have to have contempt for them and compassion for the people they claim to represent, because you know and I know that they're not representing them. They're laughing at them. They're mugging them. They're mocking them, and they're
laughing at all of us.
Inflaming them.
They're laughing at all of us.
Yes.
They're laughing at all of us. And they have nothing but contempt for us. They have nothing but contempt for the people they claim to represent, the 17.4 million, so to speak. And people don't see that. They're still blind. They're still fooled into believing this.
And we've heard quite a lot of evidence.
A no-deal Brexit will happen. The catastrophe will hit, and it will be a case of us standing up and saying, "Ha, told you so."
But we won't do that because we're better than that. And if it's not a complete catastrophe, if it's just a decline, a diminishment, then we will have to suck it up when they turn around and tell us that somehow we've been proved wrong by the fact that things have got worse. When they swore blind that things were going to get better. Gareth, I hope I can leave you with a smile on your face when I read you a text from someone who's furious that you got onto the programme when they didn't. They write, "James, why won't your people let me on to say why it would be good for us not to be a part of an anti-Christian dictatorship? Is it because we are part of an anti-Christian dictatorship?" I have no idea why they didn't put you through to air. It could have been the beginning of a beautiful friendship where... astonishingly, and if you detect a degree of, it was interesting, wasn't it? But Ventnor would have been a much better place to pick when I was talking to Vanessa from the Isle of Wight. I describe my optimism, and it's genuine. I do believe that when, eventually the facts become irresistible. The problem is that so much is now bet on getting over the line, breaking our bonds with our closest partners before the truth emerges. That seems to me to be what's in play, which is why, although it's still very important to say what benefits are there going to be, and it does seem to me to be relevant that the regime in Downing Street, where the Prime Minister who unlawfully closed down our Parliament on the advice of the man judged to be in contempt of our Parliament earlier this year, and supported, of course, by men who have invested very large sums of money in the hoped-for collapse in our currency, all of those really patriotic people, it does seem to me that they really want us to talk about anything other than what we just talked about. The unlawful suspension of Parliament. The people who've invested... Well, actually, don't take my word for that. Because, where would you go if you wanted to find somebody close to Boris Johnson speculating on perhaps why he's doing what he's doing? Well, here's his sister Rachel.
It also could be from, who knows, people who have invested billions in shorting the pound or shorting the country in the expectation of a no-deal Brexit. We don't know.
It's just a thought. I mean, and in the absence of other explanations, of course, these thoughts gather a bit of momentum, and that's why I'm asking for other explanations. What's going to be good about it? 03456060973. Chris is in Manchester. Chris, what have you got?
Oh, hi there.
Hello, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I voted for Brexit, and then... And obviously with this lie on the bus about the 350 million, I was hoping we'd get a deal, and then obviously saw that, thought I'd have a bit of a look into it.
Yeah.
I realised actually the figure was a lot more, so I decided now I want a no-deal Brexit. I wondered if you could share with your viewers the figure of VAT.
It's a radio station, mate.
Yeah, I just wondered if you could share with your viewers the...
listeners.
Listeners, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
It's not a great phone line. Just give me the benefits.
Well, I want to know the figures. If you want to share the figures of what we pay on VAT on general day-to-day products that we buy.
Yes.
Because obviously a lot of people don't understand that 20% VAT, 15% of it is put on by the EU and goes to the EU. Only 5% of VAT goes to our government.
Right.
So we're paying 15% that goes to the EU on every sort of purchase we buy. which that 15%, you failed to add that on
here's
to
the thing.
350 million.
I'm just checking on the. I mean, all I can do is.
All you can do is get your researchers to.
No, I can do it now. I can.
As quick as you can.
I've got it.
What's the figure?
I've got it here. The European Union value-added tax is a value-added tax on goods and services within the European Union. The EU's institutions do not collect the tax, but EU member states are each required to adopt a value-added tax that complies with the EU VAT code. Different rates of VAT apply in different EU member states, ranging from 17% in Luxembourg to 27% in Hungary. The total VAT collected by member states is used as part of the calculation to determine what each state contributes to the EU's budget. So it's up to us what we set it at.
No. So 15% of it is enforced by the EU. 5% our government decides to put on. So where you've got your 17% figure and then up to your 20-something%, our government was collecting 2.5%.
Sweetheart, what do you mean? Where am I getting
Don't insult me calling me sweetheart.
It's not an insult to call you sweetheart.
So there's, I don't like it.
All right, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, precious.
It's like me calling somebody homosexual a name that they don't like, so please don't call me, you're insulting me. So 15%.
What's wrong with being homosexual?
I didn't say there was anything wrong with it. I'm just saying I find you offended me with a word, like as if I was to say something to somebody, perhaps that or whatever. Let's not change the subject. Let's stick to what we're discussing.
What are we discussing?
So every country has a minimum of 15%, but they put a bit on for themselves. The 15% is for the EU. That's what they set it at. Our government adds 5% on, which they used to add 2.5% because it was once 17.5%. So,
but none of this is true.
It's a fact. If you go online, you can.
Whereabouts online? Because I'm looking at. Yes,
I'll give you a figure.
Exactly. No, tell me where you go online.
20%.
Where do you go?
VAT,
where do you go online?
20%.
Just tell me where you got it from, so I can go and look.
Why don't you let me finish speaking? Probably
because I want to check your source. I want to check your source.
You can check the source.
So what's the source?
20%.
No, that's a number. What's the source?
20% of the.
Where are you getting this information from? Because what I'm looking at is not supporting what you're saying. Where are you getting this from?
If you want to bear with me a second, I'll get it up on my phone and I'll find you the website, yeah?
Yeah, go on.
So just wait 2 seconds.
All right. I have to speak, but only because otherwise the emergency tape will kick in. I don't know, that this too solid flesh should melt, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting canon had... No? What do we get if I stop talking? Steve Allen tapes. Chris, can I come back after the break?
So I think it might be the Tax Foundation.
You think it might be what? No, I don't need might be.
I think it's the Tax Foundation. I'm parked on the side of a motorway, on the side of a dual carriage right at the minute.
Well, I don't want you getting into any bother.
No, I'm in a lane. I've got my computer with me, so I'm just trying to get it on the phone.
Tax Foundation is American.
20%.
No, I don't want you just to keep saying 20%. I want to know what your source is, Chris.
Why don't you let somebody speak when they're going to counter something from all the toss that you talk all day?
Because you need to have a source. You need to. Otherwise, you're just a bloke saying 20%.
Heinz. The source was Heinz.
Heinz? Well, as in the beans?
Yeah, Heinz. Yeah, you got it. Heinz ketchup.
Heinz beans?
Yeah, that's the source.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that was almost funny. 12:43 is the time. Let's have another go. I'll just be quiet and you keep talking, but don't say 20% again. Just tell me where you are getting your information from.
So the European Union, 1/5 of their VAT collected comes from the United Kingdom. Can you tell me how many countries?
No, I need to know where you're getting this information from.
I'm just sharing it. Everybody can Google it. It'll come up.
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
I want the good news or the bad news.
I just have Googled it.
Yeah, and
VAT-based revenue, which comprises a percentage, usually 0.3% of each member state's standardised value-added tax rate and traditional owned resources such as customs duties on imports from outside the EU and sugar levies. So you're looking at about 0.3%, Chris.
Right. So you failed to read the news last week where they stated...
Chris, mate, this is... I don't want to part as enemies, but you haven't told me where you're getting your information from. You told me to Google it, so I did.
Brexit,
and now...
no deal.
But Chris, mate, chill out.
The next day, you wouldn't have to pay the VAT on your cigarettes and alcohol, what you buy when you come back from another country. Now, if you
the government announced that we won't have to pay duty on imports of cigarettes and alcohol from other countries.
15% of tax goes to the
all right,
European
Chris,
Union.
mate, you've done me. That's it. I've changed my view. I'm now a leaver. All right, you've absolutely done me, and I'm very sorry for calling you sweetheart. It's astonishing scenes. They're unbelievable, even after all these years, that people can be still so wrong about the most simplest of things. But there we are. Dominic Cummings, of course, is a man many consider to be responsible for a lot of the misinformation that got out during the referendum campaign. But he was a figure of interest to journalists long before Vote Leave became a thing. He was, of course, first came to prominence, I think, as an advisor to Michael Gove. Harry Lambert has written an astonishingly detailed and well-researched piece for this week's New Statesman magazine, which, well, you ask a question, is he a visionary or is he a fool? I'm not going to insist that you answer it, Harry. I'm going to moot the possibility that he might be both.
I think that's definitely possible. I think he has some visionary ideas. Time will tell whether they are accurate. I think the thing that let's start off with, Dominic Cummings has some very valid criticisms of government. That's about as strong as we can get in terms of praising him at this point. We don't know much else about what his record will look like in the future, because he hasn't done much. That's the key thing to say about.
Where does his reputation come from? I'd never heard of him before he arrived at the Department of Education with Michael Gove, which, as you remind us in this piece, was something that was furiously resisted by Andy Coulson. But he was
absolutely.
He was probably a bit indisposed by the time Cummings got through the door.
Well, so 4 years. Let's go back to 4 years ago, where Cummings really has no presence anymore in the Westminster scene. He'd worked for Michael Gove for a few years at the Department for Education. Very mixed record there. Some people say he was good, number 10, and people around Cameron were very disappointed by the way he ran the department. So 4 years ago, he's really a frustrated advisor out in the cold. You know, he's in his 40s. He's had a very varied and quite strung out career. Hasn't really found his purpose. The only other moment I'd mention is he did work for Ian Duncan Smith in the early 2000s.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so he was his chief strategist. That was his 8-month tenure atop the Tory party, and then he was out.
Oh my goodness!
Which just builds this idea that really he'd kind of had his moment and he'd lost it, and then the referendum comes along and it changes all of that. I mean, that's where the reputation comes
exclusively from the referendum.
Well, I mean,
a little bit at education as well. Now, who are the most interesting people to whom you have spoken about him?
Well, that has to be his uncle, who hasn't been reported before, but his uncle is a extremely eminent and well-educated judge, and he was one of the longest-serving judges on the Court of Appeal, the second highest court of the land.
Is it a full uncle? I mean,
it's a full uncle.
Okay. Well, that's surprising in the context of elites and judges and all of those being picked over by the press. It's surprising this hasn't emerged before.
That is surprising. It's also surprising that Dominic Cummings is so vociferous about judges and
maybe
what they're
he doesn't
doing.
like his uncle. We'll never know.
Well, when I met the uncle, I think their relationship is good, but
John
they disagree.
Laws. What a
John
great
Laws.
name for a judge.
Great name. He's really the epitome of a classic judge. And when we spoke, he said some really interesting things. You know, the most important thing he said was that if Dominic Cummings goes through with the plan that he seems to have, which is to disobey Parliament on October 19th, then Boris Johnson, if he refuses to obey that law, that he requests an extension from the EU, Boris will be held in contempt of court and sent to jail.
Say that again.
Well,
so Dominic Cummings' uncle says that if Boris Johnson doesn't obey the Benn Act, he will be in contempt of court and go to jail. And just for the record, Dominic Cummings' uncle doesn't run a car wash in Carlisle. He is a former senior and very long-serving judge.
Yeah, you could almost call him the 13th member of the Supreme Court when he was on the Court of Appeal.
And of course, you know, as we've discovered, and we've had crash courses in this week, the Belfast judgment today, for example, is about what is justiciable and what isn't. So the rejection of that appeal is on the grounds that the judges don't believe it has anything to do with them because it is entirely political. Judges do disagree with each other. So, I mean, there'd be plenty of judges perhaps who disagree with John Laws about this, but I mean, the family connection is at least interesting, isn't it?
Well, the key thing is what's the intention of Parliament's Act, and how much discretion does it give Boris Johnson? And if the judges rule, if in an emergency Supreme Court session after the 19th, that Boris has disobeyed the law, then he will face jail unless he obeys the law.
I'm slightly reeling from that observation, and I knew it was coming. Sometimes when you hear the words actually uttered out loud in the wild, they hit you even harder than they did when you wrote it down. Did you ask him about what he thinks his nephew is up to?
I did, and more broadly, just to give you some context here, Laws says that he thinks the 2016 referendum was constitutionally troublesome and in many ways less legitimate than the 2014 Scottish referendum, because it's left us in this impossible position where you have elected MPs vying for position with the referendum and with the vote that we had in 2016. So you now have this situation where everyone in the country is playing a central role, but no one is playing, or rather everyone's playing a key role, but no one's playing the central role. You have the courts, you have Parliament, you have people, and that's all a consequence of the referendum, which really has no place in our system of government. You
track down other family members as well. Is that entirely fair, do you think, Harry?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think that, the way I portray them is definitely fair. And I think, Dominic Cummings is dealing with the fate of the country. And so he's really the man that controls the British government right now. And I think it's very instructive to know who his parents are in a broad way, and also to know that his grandparents, for instance, all four of them served in the Second World War. This is a man who definitely considers himself sort of child of Britain, a child of Durham. His grandparents...
Went to Durham School, I think.
He went to Durham School, yeah, the very prestigious Durham School.
It's quite prestigious.
Well,
Well, I mean, in the context of elites, and there's people at Boris Johnson's school who would look down on people who went to Durham
certainly.
School. Yeah.
What I really mean is it's prestigious in the north of England.
Yes.
And in Durham. And one other crucial point to mention about Dominic Cummings is his grandparents were doctors to the mining families of Durham. This is not a man with an archetypal Tory background. And the key thing that we're going to face now in the next election when it comes is whether this Tory party led by Dominic Cummings can win huge swathes of Labour seats in the north. And Dominic Cummings believes he can win those seats.
The polling doesn't support him yet.
Well, the polling's very unclear. And
of course it is.
Yeah, you know how it is. And the two things to say about polling, I ran an election site in 2015 for the polls. We all thought Ed Miliband was going to be Prime Minister. The polls were wrong. In 2017, Jeremy Corbyn rocketed up the polls in 6 weeks. So let's see what happens.
Anything is possible. If we've learned anything, that is probably what we've learned. I'd like, if I may, to ask you to conclude this with some positive things about Dominic Cummings, some reasons to be cheerful, perhaps, some reasons, because many people are quite spooked by this Bannonite apparent enthusiasm for breaking things so that you can rebuild them according to how you want. But I would quite like to hear some optimistic analysis.
Well, let me give you the optimistic and then the chilling, maybe. So the optimistic is that he understands that government has major failings and it needs to be corrected. But the crucial point here is the way he wants those corrections to be made. He believes in a complete lack of scrutiny, frankly. He praises on his blog a US government body, a special ops body that deliberately uses paper documents because they're easily burned so they can avoid freedom of information requests. And he believes that the cabinet should be displaced by a group of 6 or 7 people. Which is essentially what he's done in Downing Street with the creation of a few committees. So that while he does have some searing and interesting criticisms and some interesting ideas, the way he wants to carry out that agenda will be very much in the dark. That's the kind of government he wants to run.
Okay, that's optimistic.
That's the optimistic
because it could be a pared down, more efficient operation.
It could. And
the chilling stuff? You've got a minute.
Okay, well, look, I mean, anyone that works in government knows that the huge problem with the way government runs is as Dominic says, the only reality for many politicians is the announcement of a policy, not the actual introduction of it. And Dominic Cummings wants to focus on how to implement policies with much more effect. He wants to build a great new system for government. And that is a laudable aim, absolutely. The question is whether Dominic Cummings has the chops to do that. He doesn't have the experience yet.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a brilliant article. Did you enjoy writing it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well,
fascinating character.
Very much enjoyed reading it, and I recommend it heartily to everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Harry Lambert. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know if anyone really needs this, but if you are interested, and I hope old Chris in Manchester is still in his lay-by, the VAT core rate is 0.3%. Of the 20% that we currently charge. The minimum that you can charge is 15%, but we keep 97.7% of it in this country. And the 0.3% that goes towards our budgetary contribution to the EU is part of that £350 million a week. It's part of the total. So our friend in the North was wrong about absolutely everything. The percentage of VAT that goes to the European Union, the suggestion that what goes to the European Union is in excess of what was already published on the side of that bus. And bless him, every other syllable that he uttered, actually, apart from the hilarious joke about Heinz. Oh, sweetheart.